All right. And as we start our conversation today, let us pray. And good morning to anyone who is watching this recording after the fact, or good day, whatever time it is when you're watching it. Let us pray. O holy wisdom, direct us on your path. Make us worthy of your teachings and open our hearts to accept your embrace, that we may serve you in peace and grace. Amen.
Amen.
All right. And so, again, just a visual reminder of what I just said that we won't meet next week, but then we'll get back in the routine the following week. Here comes Ellie. There she is. Yay. Okay. So, hello, everyone. Now I can see you all again. All right. I wanted to ask, did we need to finish up anything on chapter 23? I've sort of lost the thread in terms of what we feel like we finished discussing. Um,
I
It's
think
hard to
we
keep track
all kind
of
of
what
have
everybody's
lost.
responding to in the story.
what was that, Ellie? I'm sorry.
It's I keep having to read back over to see what um, Job is responding to from 22, what he's responding in 23.
He's
And
continuing into 23.
Yep.
yeah, Eliphaz was saying, behave yourself and God will love you. And in 23, Job is saying, but I can't find him to ask him
Exactly.
what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was the first part of, and 24, I guess, is his
Continuation.
complaint continuing.
All right. Well, I just wanted to make sure that we felt like we had exhausted what we needed to say about 23.
I just wanted to make one observation as
Yeah.
I was thinking about it. You know, the Old Testament theology really resembles, excuse me, what we call head of household thinking these days. God is the head of the household. He comes home. He wants his dinner prepared, his slippers. No one gives him any static. And if he's not happy, the belt is likely to come off.
Hmm.
And, that was the way most of the world operated. So I suppose it's not unusual to think that the theology operated that way too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to Ray's point that you're in a relationship with God, whether you want to be or not, I would respond with Jesus' parable of the prodigal son who walked away and the father did not pursue him. He grieved over him and he wanted him back, but he did not pursue him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as I said, Patty, you take a week off at your own risk because it gives me time to think.
I know it. Golly. Well, and I think you make a really wonderful point, Fred, because one of the things we've talked about reading Job is it's hard for us as Christians who know Jesus, who are formed as disciples of Jesus. It's hard for us to understand this worldview and this understanding of God pre Jesus. And so your point about the prodigal son, I think, reinforces um, this idea that Jesus has come to reveal to us a God that we didn't understand, we collectively, right, humankind, did not fully understand. And that's so often the God of the New Testament, quote unquote, sounds so different from the God of the Old Testament. Um, and I would argue that it's more our understanding of that God. So, the prodigal son is a wonderful example of that, of painting this picture of a God who gives us free will, gives us the opportunity to wander away, and kills the fatted calf when we come back. But this God, I love the idea of the head of household. I'm just imagining, Leave It to Beaver, uh, coming home, taking off his hat, the whole bit, expecting, June Cleaver to come trotting out in her heels and pearls to pour him a drink. That's it's just a wonderful image. What do you all think about that?
Well, I think that it has a lot of merit because um, those societies were certainly really male dominated, and women were close to being chattel. They were had no rights, and so if you're going to envision a fatherly God, a father creator God, then why not reflect your whole society the
Hmm.
way it's been for thousands of years?
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, and you all, and that made me think too, Donna. I was reflecting on this week. You know, Mrs. Job really gets written out of the text very early on, and she has sustained all these losses as well. Her 10 children and all of this, and she's just silenced as Job goes on, and there's no notion that she's in this with him. And that's, I'm not going anywhere with that, just observing that, again, a period piece, because Mrs. Job is impacted just as much as Mr. Job is. Um,
At least she lived through it
yeah, hmm,
more than his kids did.
true, true. All right. Well, why don't we move on to chapter 24? Would someone like to give voice to Job in this monologue?
Sure.
Thank you, Fred.
And I think this is definitely a continuation of 23, where he's saying he can't find,
Yep.
why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days? Though there are those who move boundary stones, they pasture flocks they have stolen. They drive away the orphan's donkey and take the widow's ox in pledge. They thrust the needy from the path and force all the poor of the land into hiding. Like wild donkeys in the desert, the poor go about their labor of foraging food. The wasteland provides food for their children. They gather fodder in the fields and glean in the vineyards of the wicked. Lacking clothes, they spend the night naked. They have nothing to cover themselves in the cold. They are drenched by mountain rains and hug rocks for lack of shelter. The fatherless child is snatched from the breast. The infant of the poor is seized for a debt. Lacking clothes, they go about naked. They carry sheaves, but still go hungry. They crush olives among the terraces. They tread the wine presses, yet suffer thirst. The groans of the dying rise from the city, and the souls of the wounded cry out for help. But God charges no one with wrongdoing.
Hmm.
There are those who rebel against the light, who do not know its ways or stay in its paths. When daylight is gone, the murderer rises up, kills the poor and needy, and the night steals forth like a thief. And in the night steals forth like a thief. The eye of the adulterer watches for dusk. He thinks no one will see me, and he keeps his face concealed. In the dark, thieves break into houses, but by day they shut themselves in. They want nothing to do with the light. For them, midnight is their morning. They make friends with the terrors of darkness. Yet they are foam on the surface of the water. Their portion of the land is cursed, so no one goes to the vineyards. As heat and drought snatch away the melted snow, so the grave snatches away those who have sinned. The womb forgets them, the worm feasts on them. The wicked are no longer remembered, but are broken like a tree. They prey on the barren and childless woman, and to the widow they show no kindness. But God drags them away, the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while they are exalted, and then they are gone. They are brought low and gathered up like all the others. They are cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing?
Thank you. This is another place where I think it's really helpful to be listening to and reading different translations, especially those first couple of verses. And Fred, you have the New International, right?
Yes.
Okay. So can you read verse 1 again for us?
Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why
Thank
must those who know him look in vain for such days?
Thank you. Yeah, I just think that's so much more helpful than the translation, the New Revised Standard, which says, "Why are times not kept by the Almighty?" And that's not clear. And if you look at the Hebrew there, um, it doesn't necessarily say judgment times. So I think the NIV is much clearer. So why doesn't God judge the wicked? Is the question that Job asks at the beginning. What do you notice about this chapter, or what piques your curiosity or interest?
He never really, proves his point.
Hmm.
He says, that the wicked are going to be cut down, but the whole first half is all about how well they're doing.
Ah, okay. Great point. There is a disjuncture here. The first half and the second half really sound different, I think. Did anyone else note that or want to comment on that?
I'm not seeing so much that the wicked are doing great, but um, personally, but that this is just a list of all the crimes that they commit. Um,
And that
so
God,
until verse 18,
ah,
this is just a whole. This is the indictment, and from 18 on, well, on the other hand, they're swift. They disappear, and God drags them away, and um, that's the end of them. So I'm not sure what Job's point is.
good question. But I'm glad you said that though, Ellie, because that's where I see a break too, right between 17 and 18. And of course, we always have to remind ourselves that when this was finally written down, there were no chapters and verses, so it's an artificial division that we've inherited. Um, and so maybe it's best to just look at verses 1 through 17 as a chunk and then 18 to 25 as a chunk. Um, so why doesn't God appoint a judgment time? What's going on? You know, Job is on this rant for 17 verses again. Is there anything here that's new or that you want to reflect on?
It's just, to me, it's the disconnect. He never proves that the wicked get punished. He's pretty much secure in the idea that if you're good, there may not be anything in it for you. If you're a widow or an orphan, or you're poor, you're screwed in that society.
But then from 18 on, he's saying God, drags away the mighty by his power.
Mm-hmm.
So they become established. They have no assurance of life. I'm in the New International Version.
Yeah.
And then he says, okay, if this isn't true, who says, I mean, who can deny this?
I can deny it. I look around and I see bad people prospering all the time.
Well, let's focus on verses 1 through 17 first, because 18 to 25 really is a different point of view that he's giving voice to. So 1 through 17, it's, he's talking about, if you remember, earlier on in Job was lamenting all the things that God had done to him personally, and saying, you know, it'd be better if I were dead, if I'd go down to Sheol, if I'd never been born, yada yada yada. But now it's a little broader, and now it's almost that I hear at least that he's accusing God of not doing God's job, of falling asleep at the switch. Why isn't God judging these people? Because people are running amok all over the earth. They're moving boundaries and exploiting the poor, and people are no longer able to claim their own inheritance. They have to work for other people. They reap in a field not their own. They glean in the vineyard of the wicked. Um,
Their babies get stolen.
Babies get stolen. Um, and it's anarchy, right? This picture that he's painting. Um, they rebel.
I don't see anarchy, but I see,
Lawlessness.
there is no, well, it's, the law of, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold is making the rules.
Mhm.
This is the exploitation of the poor, and, that the wicked seem to prosper. They're the ones who are, people are carrying sheaves for, and they're the ones who are moving the boundary stones
Yep.
and, taking over other people's flocks. There is no,
And
there is no explicit mention that they're prospering, but they seem to be making everybody else miserable, and they're not getting punished for it.
Yeah, exactly. But this is a slight difference from what Job has said earlier when he was really focusing on his own plight. Now it seems like he's extrapolating a little bit and accusing God of not giving consequences for this behavior.
yeah, exactly. And this is more a God, an indictment of God. Okay, this is wrong, and if God is great, then why isn't he fixing things?
Yeah. Why isn't life fair?
Yeah, there is no justice in the world.
There's the question.
And then in 18, he goes on to say, there is, but how can, if all this other stuff is going on, how can he be making that assertion?
Well, let's hold off on that just for a minute, because I do want us to look at that, because I hear some resonances with other things there. But let's just finish this section 1 through 17. Is there anything else? Is there any imagery, any accusations that Job makes that you want to explore more?
They're running around in the dark.
Yeah.
Yeah, 14 through 17 is all when darkness comes, evil rises up. Sounds like Marvel
Yeah.
Universe.
Yeah. It's almost like a dystopia. So, this is, I wonder, so the outset of Job, that, for lack of a better term, that preamble, that prose preamble that shows the conversation between Satan and God. Job is painted as the most upright, the most faithful, whatever that looks like, person. And Satan says, what will happen if you start taking things away from him? This question that we all take issue with. But what's happening to Job here? It's now he's questioning God. And is that understandable, or should he not question God? What do you think?
Well, that's a question that one of the friends would make.
Can
Why
you
are
say
you
more
questioning
about
God?
that,
That sounds like a question that one of the friends would make, Patty. Why are you questioning God? How dare you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it goes back to the first verse. Why does the Almighty not set times for judgment? Why must those who know him look in vain for such days?
Mm-hmm.
Time is different for God. I mean, if you're thinking about eternity, for him, 17 years is probably, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for us, 17 years is, it's
Well,
awful.
for back then, that was half a
whatever.
life.
So
Right.
So that point is really well taken, Kim. So is Job judging God by human standards, right? Come on, all of this is happening. You're not doing anything. Um, you know, is Job doing that? And then the next question that I always have to ask myself, and I'll ask you all, is do we do that too? Do we judge God according to human standards? Do we expect God to operate according to our timeline? I mean, I think, Kim, that point was just really helpful.
I don't know that I judge God, but I pray for A, understanding, or B, can he come on my timeline?
Thank you very much.
It's not judging as much as it is begging.
Right. You
We don't
want
have
your
that
time.
long, Lord, get to it.
Yeah.
Yes. Or I say, speak human, speak earthling, because I just, I'm not at that
God,
heavenly.
you got to speak my language. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
If
Help
we
me to
are
understand.
I love that.
if we are to understand, I mean, what other perspective do we have?
Exactly.
We have to use our own perspective. Otherwise, the whole thing, I mean, it's meaningless if we just say, "Oh, well, that's God's way of looking at things."
Mm-hmm. We're
That
bound by our humanity, right? We're absolutely bound.
murderer, that's just his way of looking at things.
We can't, we're bound by our human language. I love that, speak human. We're bound by our sense of time. Uh, and so that makes it challenging to understand, to plumb the depths of God and God's wisdom and God's timing. Um, so, I think it's interesting because Job is, for me at least, Job is not at the very beginning of this book is not so relatable. But now I can understand Job because he sounds kind of like my prayers. Like, come on, why is this happening? Why are people raping and pillaging and doing all these horrible things? Those are my prayers too. I bet there's some of your prayers as well. Um, and so his humanity I find just really helpful and interesting. And if we think back to that beginning of the book where where God and Satan are having this conversation, um, it starts to play with my head. Like, okay, am I doing what Satan anticipates that I'm going to do when I start questioning God, or is it okay to question God?
Is Job doing what Satan said would happen?
Well, I guess that's my question. Is Job doing what Satan said would happen? Because, it sounds like he's starting to question God. Why are times not kept by the Almighty? Why is God not setting a judgment time? Why is everyone running amok and God seems to be doing nothing about it?
The British Parliament has a tradition of question time
Hmm.
in the House of
Yes,
Commons,
yes, yes. Prime Minister.
where anybody can get up and ask the Prime Minister anything
Mm-hmm.
and expect some kind of answer. And that's what Job is asking for. Why? And, as I say, I've said, if God expects worship and respect, he has to meet those on your terms.
Well, does God have to do that?
I believe so. If he expects, to benefit or to have that, the best example I have that I keep thinking of is that a God that believed in child sacrifice would have to do some really serious miracles to get that religion off the ground.
But is religion for God or is religion for people?
I assume God does not need anything that I have.
Yeah.
So, with that as a background, I think it has to be, it's a free gift to people,
Mm-hmm.
but it also has to be, it has to be in terms we can understand.
Hence the need for the incarnation. Speak human. Jesus speaks human. Um, But until we get to that point, see, this is where I think it's just hard for many of us to step back, because in Jesus we have this relationship, and there is someone who understands and embodies human existence. This God, this understanding of God is much harder to get our heads around. So it makes sense to me, to Fred's point, it makes sense that we would say, okay, come on, and to Kim's point, speak human. You know, you got to work with us here if you expect us to be in relationship with you. Um,
I think, back in the time this was written and up until about the 1950s, this would have been the way people expected the world to be. You have the father, he's off doing things during the day that you don't understand or care about, but when he comes home, you're expected to be cleaned up and properly respectful, and it's perfectly within his rights and expectations that if you're not, the belt comes off. Roman heads of household were allowed to kill anybody in their household
right.
for any reason. Just didn't like them that day. So we are repelled by that, but this was the way most of the world has operated for most of human time.
Well, I think Jesus has some things to say about that. But looking back at this text, is there anything else? I mean, I think these first 17 verses are pretty clear in what um, the charges he's leveling against the Almighty. Does anyone want to look at anything specific there before we look at 18 to 25? Because that it really is where things shift, and I think that's interesting.
Are these charges or just observations?
Well, I
or
mean,
both?
I hear him. I mean, not literal charges, but he's definitely, saying, God, you're letting things run amok, and that calls into question, for me at least, it makes me think that Job is starting to wonder about God a little bit. Why is this happening? Why doesn't God do anything? And again, it's moved from, why has this happened to me personally, to this more global experience?
Yeah, he still hasn't done what Satan said he would. And in the verses, chapters 1 and 2, he's still saying, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
Hmm?
So he may be he's not charging him with wrongdoing here in 24, but he is kind of edging towards not paying attention.
Neglect, maybe.
Neglect, yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds to me,
The father isn't bringing home the paycheck.
Donna, what were you going to say?
it sounds to me as though he thinks that Job thinks that he could run the show better. Like if at the end of every month there was a judgment and the people who did wrong were punished or maybe even sent down to Sheol, just think how it would be like a clockwork world. Everybody would know, oh my gosh, the 31st is coming. Why did I do that?
Yeah.
And everybody
I'm in deep Sheol.
yeah, right. Everybody straighten up and fly right.
Ah,
And
Life would be
it's
fair.
kind of a funny model in a way, but he has a point.
and again, think about that. The 31st is coming. That's according to human time, right? Like, okay. And if only God did things the way I see they should be done, wouldn't the world be better? Of course, right? And that's what makes me laugh at myself, because I hear myself in some of this. Like, yeah, why doesn't God order things the way I want them ordered, or the way I think? God doesn't seem to consider me very much. And if only that would be so much better. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. The 31st is coming. All right. So then we
Can
have,
you have God ordering these things at the same with free will also?
wait, can you say that again, Fred? I'm not sure I understood what your point.
If you have free will, can you also have God coming down and setting everything right on
No,
a regular basis?
There's the
no,
rub.
it knocks the heck out of free will. But it seems to me that the disciples had this great advantage of spending so much time with Jesus and listening to everything he said. But after the resurrection, they were on human time because they thought the second coming would be soon, like maybe next month.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
I think this whole question of God's time versus our time is so important. It's hard, we can't get our heads around it because we are bound in our understanding of time. And yeah, I just think it's really important to talk about that. Ellie, would you mind reading 18 to 25 again?
Okay.
Let's-
Again, I'm the New International, so that's almost the same as Fred's. Let's see, talking about the evil. Their foam on the surface of the water, their portion of the land is cursed, so that no one goes to the vineyards. As heat and drought snatch away the melted snow, so the grave snatches away those who sin. The womb forgets them, the worm feasts on them. Evil men are no longer remembered, but are broken like a tree. They prey on the barren and childless woman, and to the widow show no kindness. But God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life. He may let them rest in a feeling of security, but his eyes are on their ways. For a little while they are exalted, and then they are gone. They're brought low and gathered up like all the others. They are cut off like heads of grain. If this is not so, who can prove me false and reduce my words to nothing?
Thank you. Could you read verse 22 one more time, please?
Looking back, but God drags away the mighty by his power. Though they become established, they have no assurance of life.
Drags away the mighty by his power. Fascinating.
That's different with
Yeah.
as it
So
go on.
let's
That's
look
that's
at the
contradiction.
Hebrew because it's almost diametrically opposed in that translation. Ah, the Hebrew, he drags off the valiant. Sorry. Mashak. Mashak. Drag along, lead along,
Prolong.
prolong, draw out. Um, very different.
Dribble behind you. Goodness gracious.
Okay,
There's where
so
those words.
drag along is so what he's saying, I guess, is God prolongs the life of the mighty by his power.
They rise up when they despair of life. Translate those.
Let's see. He rises, but no one has assurance of life. Whoa, really different.
Oh my gosh.
He provides them with security and they are supported.
That's 23. Yeah.
Let's see. The word
Yeah,
that we get
that translates.
as mighty is, sorry, let me see if I can refresh this because it's slow. All right, we'll come back to that because my interlinear is very slow. Okay. So, what is Job saying in these verses 18 to 25?
What goes around comes around.
So, the word that I'm interested in here is what gets translated in the NRSV as mighty. Sorry, this is so slow. Okay, here we go.
Oh, and you've got the valiant, which is a different thing.
Exactly. Let's see. So the Hebrew, mighty, valiant. Okay, mighty and obstinate. Interesting. So God prolongs the life of the mighty. God prolongs the life of the valiant by his power. Who are the mighty and the valiant?
Well, you'd think that the antecedent is the people who are harming the childless woman and doing no good to the widow.
Mm-hmm.
But those are not praiseworthy, like as mighty or valiant would be.
Not at all.
Mighty may not be praiseworthy. That's just a reflection of temporal success.
Mhm.
And
As I read this, I can look at Job's three comforters and see and have them saying, see,
mm-hmm.
this proves, you sinned and now God has come for you.
Well, and that's what's interesting to me, Fred, because in these verses, to me, he sounds more like his friends, his comforters, than he does himself. It's like he changed his tune, his vantage point.
Well, they have always had the same theology. I've said that from the beginning. This Job and his comforters all have the same theology.
Well, they're all products of the same worldview, right?
Yeah.
Um, but what he has said is that he is not one of the sinful. So this may all be true, but it doesn't apply to him. It's like,
Oh, well, that
right?
I believe the lawyer saying is that if everybody got to judge themselves, there'd be few people in prison and no one in hell.
Exactly, exactly.
He's judging himself and saying this isn't fair. But if I were Job's comforters, I'd be pointing my finger at him and snickering.
Right? There's some hypocrisy here. I just wanted to go back to 21 and 22 for a second because it's kind of confusing to parse out. They harm the childless woman and do no good to the widow. That we can understand. Yet, there's that conjunction, yet,
Yeah, and even here it's but. Yeah.
yeah, but God drags along the life of the mighty, the life of the valiant by his power. They rise up when they despair of life. So what is Job
And
saying
that
there?
that phrase is completely different, and it must have been really obscure because it says, though they become established, they have no assurance of life. That's not the same thing at all.
Not at all. Not
Um,
at all.
could I say that in my study Bible, it talks about 18 to 22 verses 18 to 25.
Uh-huh.
And it says, these verses about the early death of the wicked are so unlike Job's views that they must be either a quotation by Job of the friends. The RSV adds, you say, at the beginning of verse
Ah.
18.
Yeah, you say
Oh,
it on the phone.
So,
they would make so much more sense.
yeah.
Fascinating. I don't have any notes to that effect. That's really helpful. But it does explain why we're wrestling with these verses. If we're saying this doesn't sound like what he said before.
People have been wrestling with it for several thousand years.
Yeah, and as Fred said, he doesn't prove his point, he contradicts it. Well, that might explain it. And it's just, again, not to beat this poor horse, but it's just another reminder why we have to be so careful about accepting the word at face value in the translation we receive without doing the critical work, because it's impossible to read it literally, because even in this conversation we have heard dramatically different, almost opposing translations of the same Hebrew text. So where is the truth, right? So it's just, again, this to me is the great argument against biblical literalism, because which text are you reading literally?
I'm looking at this from the point of view of an editor. Then the first line of chapter 25 is, then Bildad the Shuhite replied, and somebody has simply transposed a line of type. And if they put it up before verse 18, it would have been whole. That would have that whole section with 25 would be a lot more cohesive.
It would make so much more sense.
Oh, well.
Well, 25 is really short. Why don't we go ahead and read that? And then maybe we can look back at the whole thing. Yeah, and see again, given that it's 6 verses, that I think that underscores Ellie's point that somewhere there was an editorial decision that we disagree with.
Somebody unshuffled the parchments.
Would someone like to read 25 in its entirety?
I'll take that.
Thank you.
Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, dominion and awe belong to God. He establishes order in the heights of heaven. Can his forces be numbered? Upon whom does his light not rise? How then can a man be righteous before God? How can one born of woman be pure? If even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in his eyes, how much less man, who is but a maggot, a son of man who is only a worm?
Thank you. What strikes you all here?
I'm sorry, I'm reading on. Job's getting sarcastic now. And quite rightly, because that's really a mealy-mouthed little chapter there.
Do you think? What do you all think of Bildad's reply?
Yeah, I mean, why? It's like he's telling Job, why bother? There's nothing you have. There's no argument you can make. You're so insignificant, which Job has already admitted in prior chapters.
Why would he listen to you?
Yeah, I mean, you have nothing to say. Did we ever find out if there are any implications to these Shiites and, the other tribes that are mentioned?
All I know is that, oh, go ahead, Ellie.
No, I'm sorry, the Temanites, the Shuhites, and the Namathites.
Yeah. They're from different tribes in different regions, but I have not seen anything that would distinguish their points of view. That doesn't mean that there isn't.
They weren't some of the lost tribes of Israel, for example.
So they don't have any particular authority. This is just sort of their neighborhood.
Yeah. I mean, they're just identified so clearly by that.
Yeah.
I thought there might be some meaning in there that we missed.
Well, there might be. And if there is, we can
It's
try to
lost
find
in
it.
history.
Yeah, well, lost to us at least, but that doesn't mean we can't do some work on it. So how then can a mortal be righteous before God? Can humans be righteous before God? I guess that question is one that we should ask ourselves. Are we pure?
For the theology of the time, God was on the other side of an unbridgeable gulf. So, the answer would be he has, he cannot be fathomed.
But it sounds like Bildad is saying that Job is trying to fathom.
Well, at least in his, at least so that he knows why there are boils all over him, he is. And, Bildad is almost saying, you know, you deserve it. You may not know why, you may not think you've done anything wrong, but God knows better and you deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's something when he says, if even the moon is not bright and the stars are not pure in his eyes, he's saying maybe to Job, who's trying to reason it out, look, if even you who've led this good life is not pure, why do we try? Because we're just a bunch of maggots down here and we're worthless. You know what I mean? If somebody like you can be, or even the moon and the stars can be perceived by God as just imperfect, let's just throw up our hands.
Well, I'm not sure he's saying why try, but I do think he is setting, doing a reset or trying to do a reset of Job's expectations because Bildad is saying, you know, there humans can never reach the divine. And that's just a statement. That's just reality. And
Mhm.
I think, and I think this is one of the greatest issues that we humans with which we humans wrestle is this idea that we can somehow be perfect. We can somehow be pure. We can somehow be righteous. And that's why it's hard for us to admit our mistakes and ask for forgiveness because we don't want to say that we're flawed. We don't want to say that we're sinful. Um, but I don't know, and I'm not, I don't have the answer key. But for me, I don't, I don't feel like it's saying don't try. But I do think there's something to this idea that, we're never going to be perfect. It doesn't, do we just curl up and die? Well, hopefully not.
Eventually,
Well, you know what I mean. Give up, I should say. Do we just stop trying? Or do we live in light of our imperfection and God's perfection?
I'm,
Uh,
I'm seeing this as he doesn't say anything in that direction, but it does sound to me like a rebuke. Sort of, who are you to be
mm,
making any kind of demands of God? Um, he's to God, you're a worm, and that's like, uh, just
Or
who are
maybe,
you? What right do you think you have to
or
ask
maybe he's,
for judgment or forgiveness or fairness or anything? Just how do you think? Who, who are you to
maybe he's
think
saying,
that you can question God?
you know how above in chapter 24 that Job is differentiating between the righteous and the unrighteous, right? The people who turn away from the light and then these other people. Um, and maybe Bildad is sort of knocking that down. Maybe he's saying, well, who is the righteous? Who are you qualifying as the righteous?
mm-hmm,
How are you righteous before God?
mm-hmm.
we're
Maybe
all worms.
we're all worms.
Just some are more equal worms than others.
Some are meaner worms.
I want to read something from the Psalms for us as we start to wind down. And this is a psalm with which I think most of us are familiar. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but find no rest. Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our ancestors trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were saved. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. But I am a worm and not human, scorned by others and despised by the people. All who see me mock at me. They make mouths at me. They shake their heads. Commit your cause to the Lord. Let him deliver. Let him rescue the one in whom he delights. And it goes on. That's Psalm 22. Where do we know that psalm? From where do we know that psalm?
of course.
Hmm?
Well, the crucifixion, of course.
Crucifixion, exactly. Exactly. My God, why have you forsaken me? Um, so again, this idea from the psalmist of humans are worms, you know, that the psalm of lament again, um, you know, there are definite resonances, there are definite echoes here. What do then we do, fast forwarding to our present day, what do we do with this idea of human fallibility that cannot ever approach God? That can, and by approach, I don't mean come before God, can never be the, you know, be as God. That we humans can never be righteous before God. What do we do with that? Do we believe that? Do we not believe that? Do we make
I think
peace with
we just need to accept it, no?
it? I think that that's certainly what Bildad is saying. You know, this is the reality. We are humans. God is God. Um,
Mhm.
And this is why God needed to send Jesus to interpret, to say, yeah, you really are worms, but you can ask.
mhm.
I'm,
But
I'm,
you're
I'm
worms
giving
that
you a
God
hand up
loves.
here.
I'm reminded, for those of you who've been around the Episcopal Church for a while and are familiar with Rite One, you know the prayer of humble access. We are not worthy so much as to
That's
gather up the crumbs
crumbs under
under
your
thy
table.
table. That prayer really bothers a lot of people. And they say, well, of course we're worthy. Well, on our own, we're not worthy. Why do we think we are worthy? But God's property is always to have mercy. God loves us. We know we're not worthy, and God loves us. God makes us worthy by God's love.
That's a
Um,
that's a depth that is missed these days when everybody is wonderful and lovable and
yes.
perfect in themselves. And no, you're human and you started out as dust, and it's enriches your connection with Jesus to realize how much he's doing for you, rather
Oh,
than he's just my little friendly hand, you know.
preach it, sister. That was beautifully said. That was so beautifully said, Ellie.
To take the batter, the other side. How do you know what tells you we're dust? God created us. God looked at us and said, "This is good." You know,
I've never been happy with the idea that God created me in his image. I mean, first I know, no, I'm not God. So I and how do I know what he looks like? I mean, who are you all?
I always took that to be a sort of a intellectual or spiritual image.
Well, the fact that we can ask questions is what lifts us above everybody else, or all the other creatures. But still, that doesn't mean that we are better because we ask questions, because a lot of times we get the answers wrong. Most of the time.
A lot of times we ask really bad questions.
Why can't I hit you on the head? I don't know. I mean,
What do you mean?
That is, and I will go back to Goodell, who proved that you cannot validate a system from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
So you can't know that you're a worm until you're stopped being a worm.
or you see that all your other people are worms.
Well, I mean, the idea that we are all beyond redemption except through this one door, I find to be a little bit egocentric for the people who are holding the door.
Well, is saying that we are inherently maggots or worms, is that the same as saying we're beyond redemption?
The traditional Christian view would be the only way you can be redeemed is through this one door.
that's hubristic, but I
That's Christian dogma.
well, it is. And Christians don't always have all the answers. I mean, but the principle that you need help to be able to perform as you were created, as you were. I heard potential a lot when I was growing up. Humans have potentials, like that stupid Pinocchio ad. But everybody's got it, but it's sometimes you need to recognize that it's unrecognized and that you need help to develop it.
I had the exact opposite experience growing up. All my teachers said, "Oh, he has great potential that he's not using."
Oh yeah, that's what I mean.
That seems to be the standard.
Mhm. Well, unless you're a Pulitzer Prize winner in 8th grade, then no.
Yeah. Then you've peaked too early. Well, but I mean, the idea that we are all worms, does not resonate with me, shall we say. I believe that, one of the keys to happiness is to live a life of gratitude. Be grateful for what you have rather than bitching about what you don't have.
Of course.
But, and I look back at this and I say, Christianity has been very patronizing towards other faiths. We have the answer. It's the only answer. It's the only, and yet I look around the world and I see very, very Christian ideas. So I'm going to expand that to say they're human ideas, implemented maybe a little bit differently, but with the same, the golden rule keeps popping up across cultures.
When you say they're Christian ideas, Fred, do you mean that they are ideas of Jesus or that they are ideas that have come out of the church? Because those are two different things.
I would say, that people fleshed out, and the problem with Jesus is he didn't live long enough, to correct the misinterpretations, and even worse, he didn't live long enough when people rose up and said, this is what you really mean. He wasn't there to slap them down.
Right. So my question of you is, when you say you see Christian ideas or ideals and that you'll say they're human, do you mean that they are ideas that Jesus espoused or that they are ideas that have grown out of the church? That's
some of both.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to limit. The only things that I take as being fundamentally from Jesus, that may not have been amended as time went on and as the Bible was retranslated, would be the parables. Those ring true to me, and perhaps the Sermon on the Mount and things. But he, one minute he's on the mount, the next minute he's on the plain.
Right. Is it
very possible he kept giving the same sermon, though
right.
You would never do that, Patty, but he probably did.
Well, and also, does the location matter? Well, to Matthew, it matters that he's on the mount because Matthew is trying to paint him as the next Moses. So, the mount is important. But maybe it doesn't matter where it was. But the sayings, to your point, Fred, those sayings they're not identical in the two Gospels, but there's a lot of consistency. Well, this was, as always, a fascinating conversation. And I just want to close out by shining a light on something Anna Maria said a minute ago. And she said, aren't we meant to accept this, that we aren't God? And I agree with Anna Maria. I think we are meant to accept that. And I think it's the hardest thing that we humans can do. And that's what we wrestle with, right? And so I leave us with that for now, and maybe we can think and pray about that a little bit as we come back in 2 weeks and pick up at chapter 26, I guess, because we did 24 and 25 today. Thank you all. Wonderful conversation. And I will see you, if not, well, I won't see you Sunday because there will be church Sunday. It's going to be morning prayer. Deacon Mary's going to lead it. And then I'll be back on September 4th, and we'll be back to Bible study 4th, 5th, 6th, September 7th. So thank you all. See you soon.
Thank you, Patty. This was great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. This is
Bye.
wonderful.